I'm Sienna. I'm the kid.
I'm Sarah. I'm the mom.
This is Queer Kid Straight Mom.
Let's talk. Welcome back to Queer Kids Straight Mom. Today we're talking about mental health and queer relationships. Specifically, I was inspired by Olivia Rodrigo's new album.
As everyone has been.
It is really good, so listen to it if you haven't. But it is called You Seem Pretty Sad for a Girl in Love.
Like, seriously, like, if you haven't listened to it, hit the pause button, switch on whatever audio app you're listening on, just, like, hit the back arrow, search up Olivia Rodrigo, play You Seem Pretty Sad for a Girl in Love, and then come back in 50 minutes.
Yes, and it's so good. But also, like the name of the album suggests, there is a theme of relationships not fixing everything, love not fixing everything, that you can still be sad when you're in love. And especially this kind of, and I don't know if she's specifically speaking to a mental illness of any sort, but she does sing about a lot of things that are very like anxiety driven, and thinking that that would go away when she met the right person, and it didn't. And we thought this was particularly relevant for our podcast and the queer community because there are so many conversations around queer people and mental health, and it's a significant issue. LGBTQ plus adults are more than twice as likely than heterosexual adults to experience a mental health condition. Trans people are 4 times as likely as cisgender people. And some of that is situational. A lot of LGBTQ plus people face discrimination, prejudice, denial of rights, harassment, family rejection. All of these can lead to new or worsened mental health conditions, particularly if they intersect with socioeconomic challenges, which can also be quite common in this community.
And not to mention any other intersectional identities like, being a person of color, having a disability, all of those things can also amplify challenges.
Yep. And there is a term called minority stress that it is proven that people in minority groups do have this level of stress that people, that are not specifically part of a racial or sexual or gender minority group don't experience.
Well, it's almost like performance anxiety, right? Because knowing that you are always representing a demographic that because you deviate from the norm in some way, that your actions are always going to be taken as representative of an entire group as opposed to just your own, that any mistake you make or any way you mess up or anything you say that's rude or anything that you do wrong in any way whatsoever is going to be seen as representational of an entire group of people, and that is all hanging on your shoulders. Like, you're constantly kind of trying to perform and make sure that you're not letting anyone down. An interesting piece of research that they have found, and it's not specifically related to queer people, but students of color, when they take the SAT or other standardized tests in high school, will oftentimes do worse because of this phenomenon where there's so much riding on them, right? Like, oh, there are all these more negative outcomes for students of color in standardized tests, and so you got to make sure you do really well. And that itself actually ends up in the aggregate making students of color do worse.
Wow, that's interesting. I had not read that.
I think it's true for female students on math and science related tests as well.
That explains it. I will chalk my less good math and science scores up to that research. But seriously, it's real. It's real that there are plenty of things that contribute to mental illness or worsened mental illness in the queer community. However, I think it is also important to remember that mental illness or the symptoms of mental illness are not always situational. Sometimes this is a biological condition that people will struggle with no matter how well their life is going. Certainly, the bar can be moved to a higher baseline, but it does not make the sad days or the anxieties or the, compulsions, whatever those things may be, being happy doesn't make those go away completely if you suffer from a mental illness.
And I think it can, knowing how many people in your community, using queer people as an example, knowing how many queer people do have all of these really serious challenges, dealing with really extreme levels of homophobia or transphobia in their lives, can also end up making some queer people with mental illnesses feel invalidated. Like, oh, well, why do I feel like this? Why am I so sad? Like, everything's great in my life. Like, my parents are accepting of me. My parents do love me unconditionally. I have a great partner. My friends all are amazing. My job is going great. So why do I still feel so sad? Or why are all these things still not working right in my brain?
Yeah. And I think that ends up, because that is true, that ends up sometimes getting muddled with this message that we constantly talk about how important mental health is for queer youth and queer adults as well, and how acceptance can make such a huge difference in mental health and reducing suicide. And all of that is so, so important to talk about. But then you run into those people that say, well, this person is accepted and nobody's being mean to this person and they still have depression. So obviously it's not acceptance. It doesn't matter. It's being queer is a mental illness. They suffer from depression and anxiety because they're mentally ill. All of these conversations are so important, but there are a lot of assumptions made that I think can make it more challenging to navigate sometimes, not only what Sienna said about feeling the stress of representing your community, but I have an accepting family and I'm married to somebody I love and I have a good job and everything's going well in my life. And I can't admit to people that I suffer from depression because then they'll just say, none of that matters. Gay people are depressed because there's something wrong with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it makes it harder to talk about
And I
mental
think
illness.
it can also be compounded by the way that, queer liberation is often framed, especially during Pride Month, is like, oh, love is love, rainbows, hearts, flowers, etc., parades, everything's great, la-di-da-di-da, confetti balloons, etc. That it's certainly very joyful for a lot of people, and that's a good thing. But I do think that, framing everything as like, love is the focus, everything is about love, can be very reductionist.
Yeah. Love is love, and love solves a lot of things, but it doesn't solve everything. And there is evidence that it can be protective. There's some research out of Northwestern University that gay and lesbian youth feel less distress from bullying when they're in a romantic relationship. Just having that person that's like the first person you go to share things with and to go through things together actually can be protective. It's interesting, this is not the case for bisexual teens. They actually experience more distress when they're in romantic relationships, which it mentioned might be because of some of the misunderstandings that bisexual men feel like this pressure to meet both straight masculine and gay male stereotypes. I didn't know this, but apparently a lot of bisexual women find themselves in a relationship with men who expect to have threesomes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there are different stresses, but there are ways that romantic relationships can be protective for some queer young people. Like we said, it does not solve everything. And especially going into adulthood, as you have more pressures from the world and your life, like we don't know if that relationship protection, transfers over.
I'd be really curious. I haven't looked at that study. I'd be really curious to see what some of their controls were for various other factors. Like, are you dating the one other openly gay kid in your school of 100 kids? In that sense, a romantic relationship might also just be the only reflection of queer community that someone has.
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah. I didn't look at those details, so we'll make sure we put that study on the website and everybody can take a look if you're interested in diving into that, because that does seem like an interesting conversation.
Because I do think, like, we also, as a society, and this is not at all exclusive to queer people, it's very much true of cis-het society as well, we put a ton of pressure on romantic relationships. Like, so much pressure. Like, you would never expect, one friend or one family member to carry all the levels of burdens of like financial and emotional and physical and all of these different kinds of needs that people have all tend to get dumped on one person in a romantic relationship, especially if it's, if you're in a long-term relationship or you're married. There's like a lot of expectation we put on those relationships that we wouldn't see as reasonable in another context. But because of this sort of elevated status we hold romantic relationships to, it's like, oh, well, that's totally normal. That's how these relationships work. And, your partner ends up being like your therapist and your financial manager and all of these burdens that can be really, really straining.
Yeah, that's true. It's not a magic bullet that can even create more stress. So, but look, we always love to find reasons to talk about our favorite shows. So, two examples that I think actually address this issue successfully, and I haven't read the later books after Heated Rivalry, but I have heard that there is a storyline where they deal with Ilya's mental illness, with his depression. And then the other one is Heartstopper, which even after Nick and Charlie are together and, they've come out to people and they're happy in their relationship, Charlie has to deal with an eating disorder. So in both of these cases, they got that like, okay, we went through all of the like things and now we're together and we're happy and people accept us. And these individual characters still it doesn't go away. The pain of depression, anxiety, the kind of OCD stuff that Charlie deals with, like those things don't disappear just because they're happy in their relationships. Even though they have a supportive partner, these are real biological conditions. And, they both have, Ilya's got the stress of a really harmful relationship with his family and the trauma of finding his mom. And Charlie has, dealt with a lot of bullying and some not acceptance from his family. So there are situational factors, but these are two people that, even when things are going well in their lives, have to deal with mental illness. And I think it really not only kind of sends that message well that, like, don't feel like there's something wrong with you if you don't feel as happy as you're supposed to feel because you found the love of your life and you're together and things are going well. Now, also, I think, particularly, like I said, I haven't read further in Heated Rivalry, but in Heartstopper, we see Charlie actually having more distress because he doesn't feel like he's being fair to Nick.
Mm-hmm.
I have this person who loves me and accepts me and wants to help me, and I can't make myself better, and I'm stressing him out.
Mm-hmm.
That's a way that being in a loving relationship with somebody, I think, for somebody dealing with mental illness can kind of ramp those feelings up.
It's interesting because I know that a tendency among well-meaning people, if someone is dealing with really severe depression or suicidal ideation, is a lot of times to be like, but think about how many people love you. Think about how many people would be sad if you went away. And, speaking from experience, that actually can make it feel a lot worse to think like, oh, and on top of all these other horrible things I'm feeling, now I'm like feeling the secondhand sadness for my friends and family.
Yeah. I don't have data to back this up, but I'm guessing that there is a link between mental illness and people that are like extremely empathetic.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, that like knowing that you have somebody who's devoted to you and wants to make you feel better, or like you said, loving family, friends, it can sometimes make you feel worse because you don't want other people to be worried.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of mental illness gets covered up instead of people getting help because they don't want to scare people or worry people or make them sad. And mental illness can be a hurdle in a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as a person with clinical anxiety, it took Dad a really long time to understand. Like, no, she's not trying to be a pain. She's not worried about that thing to be annoying or to cause, to find problems or to be negative. I just am worried because I'm an anxious person and I'm worried. Or, when I like get caught on some detail that didn't sound right about something and I keep like asking a million questions, it's just because like there's that little glitch in my head that needs to be, I need the right answer to that question or I can't move on. And I'm not trying to cross-examine anybody, and I'm not being suspicious, and I'm not all of that. I just like the thing wasn't satisfied. And so I think if you aren't aware of your partner's mental illness, or I guess I would encourage you, if you have a partner who suffers from any kind of mental illness, depression, anxiety, even if it's mild, or you suspect they do some research and find out like what that manifests as, what that looks like, so you understand what's happening. Because I know in my case, like then you just feel worse because you're like, well, this person thinks that I'm trying to be difficult. And now I'm like worried about that on top of everything else. Whereas I think if you can say, okay, this is fine. I know you need reassurance because of your anxiety. And so I can speak to that. That's a lot more helpful than like, why do you always have to make a problem? And I know, like, in your relationship, there are things that being anxious or always being worried about people's reactions to you.
Mm-hmm.
Those can cause conflicts in relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I know that one that can be very challenging for me is I tend to get very, very, very anxious and spiral very quickly if I am worried that someone is not safe. Like, oh, I know that they were driving and I haven't heard from them in longer than I expected. So they probably got in a car accident and died, which is, of course, not a realistic thing to think after, 20 minutes of not hearing from someone. But it's something that my brain latches onto very quickly and very easily. And it ends up coming across, I think, as controlling, right? As I have to know where you are at every second of every day. And if you don't text me back within 5 minutes, then I'm angry at you. But it's like, no, it's not so much that I'm angry. It's just that, like, I got really freaked out when I didn't hear from you for a couple of hours.
Yeah. Not to downplay the seriousness of that, because that sounds extremely stressful. But that does sound a lot more reasonable than, why does this can have a dent in it? Did you drop it? Did you drop it leaving the store? Because if you just dropped it leaving the store and it hasn't had a dent in it for that long, we could just put it in the fridge and it'll probably be okay. But if you bought it with a dent in it and we don't know how long it's been dented, and has it been at room temperature, and has botulism been growing it?
Dude, you have no idea how much food I've made Irene throw out because I was like, this is going to give us food poisoning after 1 hour of being at room temperature.
So you also got that treat from me, huh?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, like, I can laugh at it, but it also is something that, especially back when Sienna and KJ were really little, and I, like, in a lot of ways, being a parent made my life so much better. But mental illness wise, like, all of a sudden, for the first time, I had the weight of keeping these two pretty helpless people safe.
Mm-hmm.
And that sent everything into hyperdrive, and I was freaking out about food all the time, and I couldn't fly, and everything went overboard. So, I mean, I guess that's another element of it, is sometimes when you have somebody, loving somebody means it can make anxiety worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so none of this is to say that relationships aren't good and healthy. But it is, I think, really important to remember that it is not supposed to fix everything, even though a lot of movies and books and TV shows are designed, especially like romances, to make you feel like, and then they fall in love and live happily ever after. And like I said before, I think that can lead to a lot of guilt when it doesn't turn out to be happily ever after.
Well, it's the very nature of a story arc, right? Is that there's a beginning, and then there's a conflict, and then there's a resolution to the conflict. And that's the kind of story that tends to, like, scratch that itch in our brain of, like, that is what is satisfying for us to read about, especially if we're not looking for something, like, really, really intellectual. We just want, like, a story that will make us, that will find compelling and make us happy. But by definition, if you say, and then they lived happily ever after, you're suggesting that the worst of the troubles are behind them, which might not be true. And it doesn't mean that, like the relationship is over or their lives are ruined. Or for that matter, that like it's a bad thing for a relationship to end, because sometimes a relationship can be very meaningful and very happy and healthy. And then sometimes it just naturally comes to an end. And that doesn't make those memories less valuable or less worthwhile. And it doesn't make you less valuable or less worthwhile. But, you know, like our lives are not as like clean and linear as the story arcs our brains come up with would like to have us believe. And like that's okay, but it can be really hard to process.
Yeah, that's probably an advantage to TV shows. I guess you can have future seasons. Although I feel like that is a newer thing, because I feel like a lot of the older TV shows I can think of, like Friends, for example. You know, it was years and years of like, are Ross and Rachel ever going to get together?
Mm-hmm.
And Heartstopper and Heated Rivalry, for example, are like, you kind of know at the end of the first season that, yes, they're going to get together. And then they kind of take that next step of, and then here's what that looks like. There are still challenges. And we know they're in it for life. They love each other. They're good. They're solid. But we get to go on that journey of what it looks like to face challenges together.
But even then, there still has to be, I mean, I guess unless they're just literally going to go on forever for the rest of our lives. There still has to, like, I would argue, and there's a bunch of discourse about this going on the internet right now, but I would argue that if you present an audience with like a romance and it is in the romance genre, people will feel let down if the couple does not have a happy ending. Maybe that's a second chance romance, or maybe it's a romance that follows a couple after they've gotten together initially for a while, but there's still that happy ending, and it's still part of the genre.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we just probably as human beings need reassurance that it's going to be okay in the end, right?
Yeah.
But I think it is nice to see representations of, you know, from these TV shows to other shows that have like dealt with similar issues, to Olivia Rodrigo in this album, which if you didn't do what we said, please go listen to it. You know, it's just a very real, this isn't the cure. I thought this would be the cure, and it's not the cure. And I appreciate people putting that out there, because I think that's a really important conversation.
Now, as is the way with like internet bubbles, I don't actually know how widespread a thing this is. However, I did see someone refer to the upcoming, or I guess they're in theaters now, but the Hayley Kiyoko movie Girls Like Girls and the queer horror movie Leviticus as gay Barbenheimer. And I am choosing to assume that everyone understands that to be the case. So we will be doing an episode on gay Barbenheimer.
All right. So get out and see those if you haven't yet. And we're going to do the same. And if you have thoughts in the next couple of weeks before that episode comes out, let us know, message us, and tell us what you think needs to be part of the conversation. We'll catch you next time.
Bye.
If you found this episode interesting, informative, amusing, please review and follow us on your podcasting platform of choice. Getting those reviews and follows really helps us show up more in the algorithm and be able to reach more people to help them. You can find us on social media, Instagram and Threads at queerkid.straightmom, Blue Sky at qksm.bsky.social, and Facebook at queerkidstraightmom. We are no longer on Twitter.